Hello everyone, Anya back again today. I wanted to start reading another book besides the Montessori, the Absorbent Mind one I'm doing for my study. This book I'm going to be reading is related to something I've mentioned in a couple of my other videos about how I've struggled. I did for a long time with an eating disorder. And this book is called Fasting Girls. It is the history of Anorexia Nervosa. And I thought, even though the person watching this personally might not have experienced an eating disorder or anorexia per se, but probably someone you know has. It's, Indy's just licking my feet. I think 30 or 40 million people in the US alone have that or suffer from eating disorder. And I think it's 1 or 2% of the population have struggled before. So you definitely know someone that has struggled before. So I thought this would be good for all of us to learn about in general. So this book it's the first kind of historical book on eating disorders I could find in kind of my learning and understanding about it. Because I wanted to really understand the origin of it kind of in our culture and society, why that disorder has become so much more and more and more prevalent throughout time. So this book was first published in 1988. And it's by Joan Jacobs Brumberg. So we'll start with the preface. Whoa, there we go. In 1988, when I published the first edition of this book, many people believed that anorexia nervosa was a fad that would pass away quickly from the American scene. Instead, it has become a regular feature on the psychological landscape of American women, and it has actually spread beyond our borders, crossing oceans and continents into Western Europe, Asia, and Latin America. In the 1990s, Fasting Girls was translated into German and Japanese, providing proof that Americans export eating disorders along with McDonald's hamburgers, Disney movies, and images of Michael Jordan, but Jackson as well. I watched a lot of movies and documentaries about eating disorders when I was 16 or 17, really unwell, just because I was interested in the disorder while I had it as well, obviously. So I would sit and watch a lot of movies and videos about it. And all of the documentary stuff and the just normal movies would be American. There's no kind of other older Asian movies or even Australian stuff I couldn't really find. It was definitely all American. Even on the remote island of Fiji, the arrival of television and Western cultural values along with it generated a sharp increase in eating disorders among adolescent girls. According to a 1999 study by Harvard anthropologist Anne E. Becker, Fijian girls' desire to be slimmer occurred in spite of their culture's traditional preference for plump body types. And in China, where memories of famine are still vivid, well-educated, middle-class girls in the wealthiest cities now visit places like the Beijing Yingdong Sanitary Weight Loss Center as doctors report an increase in eating disorders. This recent globalization of the ideal of thinness, plus all the talk in the American media about which actresses and models are or are not anorexic, suggests that eating disorders now have a firm hold on our psyches, and that they continue to be a characteristic of female experience on a worldwide scale. As Fasting Girls demonstrates, anorexia nervosa was named and identified in the 1870s but it remains something of a mystery over a century later in its new international context. Today, we know quite a bit more than we did a decade ago when I wrote this book. For example, the most recent American research has shown that eating disorders run in families, a pattern that suggests their origin could be genetic. I say could because this family pattern may also be the result of a shared environment and style of parenting. There are other new developments since the 1980s. While the incidence of what is now called restricting anorexia nervosa has held fairly constant, bulimia, the binge purge syndrome, has been more on the rise. More males are seeking therapeutic assistance for eating disorders than ever before, although their numbers are small compared to females. And the age of eating disordered patients has dropped in the United States to include some youngsters before they even enter puberty. Eating disorders are not limited to young people, however, and they can continue well into adulthood. During my treatment of my eating disorder, there was probably one or two males or like just young men that were in the groups. It's obviously, as it says, it's on the rise, but during my treatment as well, there was very few men seeking support. I think there's also more stigma against them actually being expressive about their struggles if they're suffering with an eating disorder. So there's probably a lot more that aren't seeking help that need it. Taken together, this is not an encouraging report on the period since 1988. Yet there is no anorexia nervosa epidemic, even if it sometimes feels that there is. Although eating disorder clinics do report that their rates doubled and tripled in the 1990s, estimates of the number of official cases is low. Only 0.5% of all American women suffer from anorexia, and 2 to 3% have bulimia. Studies also indicate that only 1 of 10 individuals with an eating disorder is in treatment, a finding that complicates the issues of real numbers. Age is critical in terms of who is most at risk, and on the nation's college and university campuses, an estimated 1 in 5 women students suffers from an eating disorder. As a faculty member at Cornell University and an active lecturer on the eating disorders circuit since 1988, I know firsthand that some of our finest educational institutions are searching for ways to help talented female students cope with their food and body image problems. Eating disorders probably command attention out of proportion to their numbers because they demoralize so many of the nation's brightest young women, and they can hold middle-class families in their sway for years on end. They are also notoriously hard to treat, and in the current managed care environment, many families find themselves without the kind of insurance coverage that they need and had a decade ago. Some of the special attention to anorexia nervosa is also voyeuristic, such as the constant stream of reports about the devastation of the disease in television journalism and women's magazines. This is not surprising in a culture like ours, where thin female bodies are so desirable. In fact, American women have a love-hate relationship with this disease. As I toured the country, speaking to women's groups, I had dozens of normal women telling me jokingly that they wish they could have anorexia nervosa just for a little while. That sad and disturbing joke provoked me to write another book in 1997 called The Body Project, An Intimate History of American Girls. All these developments, combined with the current ideal of nearly emaciated female beauty, make it tempting to call this the anorexic age. We clearly revere thin bodies and we dislike fat ones. And the pressure we feel to perfect our bodies is more intense now than it was even a decade ago when Fasting Girls was on the drawing board. Although historians usually fail at predicting the future, in this case I can say that I was right about the biography of this particular disease. Anorexia nervosa was born in the 19th century. It flourished at the end of the 20th, and its staying power seems uncompromised as we cross the bridge into the new millennium. How long have we been going now? All right, I think I'll do a couple more pages of the first proper chapter, and that'll be good for the first one, I think. So, introduction. I am not a recovered anorexic, nor am I the mother of an anorexic daughter. I make this point at the outset so that my readers will understand the perspective of this book. I am a historian, and my interest in anorexia nervosa stems, in part, from observation of social change within my own lifetime. In 1965, while a senior at the University of Rochester, I tutored patients in the pediatric section of Strong Memorial Hospital. One of my students, a young woman named Sherry, was so emaciated and withdrawn that I found it painful to be with her. Although she looked like 12 or 13 years old, Sherry was actually 15, and the nurse told me that she was suffering from anorexia nervosa. I learned that Sherry would not eat, and that some anorexics actually starve to death. When I carried this disturbing information back to my friends and the dormitory, my news was met with both shock and skepticism. None of us had ever heard of anorexia nervosa before. By 1985, I was a faculty member at Cornell University, teaching large undergraduate courses in the history of American women and the family. In this role, I met and listened to many undergraduate women. What I heard was a surprising amount of sophisticated talk about anorexia, talk that revealed a real familiarity with the disorder and its symptoms. I also discovered, as a member of the admissions committee, that some female students applying to Cornell related their choice of major to experience with anorexia during high school. The field of psychology has begun to intrigue me, wrote one applicant. My best friend is anorexic. I provide as much support as I can, but I feel helpless. Eventually, I realized that it was nearly impossible to find a young middle-class woman who did not know about anorexia nervosa. This situation provided a sharp contrast to my own experience 20 years earlier, when my friends and I marveled at the mystery of the exotic starving disease. As a historian, I had to ponder the new popularity of anorexia nervosa. Why does a disease become more prominent in one time period than another? This question has enormous relevance for American life in the 21st century. As a society, we are preoccupied with medical discourse and with the discovery and conquest of disease. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS, Alzheimer's, herpes and chlamydia, osteoporosis, premenstrual syndrome, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and anorexia nervosa all seem to be new diseases, unknown or unnoticed in prior generations. Anorexia nervosa became the focus of my professional research when I joined the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Cornell as its resident historian. I had already demonstrated a particular interest in the changing historical experience of female adolescence in the United States. Now I was drawn into the world of the behavioral sciences and a range of issues having to do with adolescent physical, social, and cognitive development, with family relations, education, and sexuality. As the sole spokesperson for history in a department of psychologists and sociologists, I was repeatedly challenged by my colleagues to explain the origins of contemporary social problems, especially those that affect adolescent girls in our society. Inevitably, I had to confront the issue of anorexia nervosa and eating disorders, since both were gaining attention and momentum. My curiosity, provoked by personal experience over 2 decades ago, prompted me to ask a set of basic questions. What is the history of anorexia nervosa? Which historical forces account for its emergence as a modern disease? And why is there so much anorexia nervosa now? Today's anorexic is one of a long line of women and girls throughout history who have used control of appetite, food, and the body as a focus of their symbolic language. Although anorexia nervosa is a relatively modern disease, female fasting is assuredly not a new behaviour. In fact, there is a long history of food-refusing behaviour and appetite control in women dating back, at least, to the medieval world. Anorexia nervosa implies important continuities. Anorexia nervosa implies important continuities in female experience across time and place. Historical, anthropological, and psychological studies suggest that women use appetite as a form of expression more often than men, a tendency confirmed by scholars as well as clinicians. Work by the historian Caroline Walker Bynum, for example, demonstrates that in the High Middle Ages, the 13th through the 16th centuries, the lives of women such as Catherine of Siena was characterized by extensive fasting and passionate devotion to the Eucharist, taking only the wafer and wine, symbols of the body and blood of Christ. Moreover, where writings by these women survive, we find the same pervasive images of eating, drinking, and food that appear later in the thought of the contemporary anorexic, who is food obsessed, constantly counts calories, and structures her life around the avoidance of food. Medieval scholarship unambiguously demonstrates that there have been moments in time other than our own when large numbers of women and girls refused to eat regularly or practiced extraordinary forms of appetite control. Despite this pattern, we should avoid easy generalizations about the existence in past times of the modern disease entity anorexia nervosa or about women's nature. Although the fasting and food preoccupations of medieval women suggest anorexia, the symptomatic continuities can be misleading. Just because a behavior occurs across cultures or time does not necessarily mean that it has the same cause or that it is biologically based. I address this issue by presenting a tableau of women fasters, one that demonstrates that there are not only changing interpretations of food-refusing behaviour, but also varying reasons for female control of their appetite. Even as basic a human instinct as appetite is transformed by cultural and social systems and given new meaning in different historical epochs. All right, I think that might be a good spot to stop. Starting to talk about the historical discovery of it. Next time we'll go a bit more into back to 1870 when it was first diagnosed. All right, thank you very much for listening with me. I think next time I want to share a bit more about my own experience as well, obviously, that I'm reading this. I think I'll do that a bit more next time. I'll stop and share a bit more. So thank you very much. Lots of love to everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye.